Death at Devil's Bridge, Chapter 22. Where will it ever end? The next we know, a man may be condemned by the voice of his own blood. Edward Lakin. Charles came into the library looking for Kate. When he did not find her there, he rang loudly for Mutt. "Where," he asked, "will I find Lady Catherine? I should like to speak to cook as well, if you please." He glanced at the gold clock on the mantel. "And what a time will we have lunch?" "Luncheon, I fear, sir, is delayed. It seems her ladyship and Mrs. Pratt have gone off together, sir, leaving no instructions as to the kitchen. Miss Marsden is here, however," he added. "She's at work in your dark room with your permission," she said. "If you should like me to interrupt her." "That is not necessary," Charles said. "Let her work. But you say Lady Catherine and cook have gone off together. Where have they gone?" "I can't say, sir. I was in a hurry. Her ladyship took the pony cart." Before she left Devil's Bridge that morning, Kate had told Charles about her conversation with Agnes and her plan to speak to the widow Jessup. He had encouraged her, having learned from experience that his wife had ways of discovering information that he could not, a woman's touch approach to entirely wanting in his investigation. He also guessed that Kate had stopped in the kitchen to ask cook about the crockery pot of red grease, although he could not hazard a guess where she and Mrs. Pratt had gone. As to luncheon, however, he knew how to fend for himself. "Well then, Mutt," he said, "I trust we might find a bit of bread and cheese in the larder, and perhaps a slice or two of cold meat and something to drink. See what you can discover that might do for myself and Constable Lakin, please, and bring it here shortly. I'm expecting the constable at any—" He heard the crunch of wheels on the gravel. "Ah, there he is now." When the constable came into the library, Charles observed that his friend wore a disgruntled look. "Your interviews at the inn did not go well?" he asked. "Go well?" Lakin asked with some sarcasm, dropping into a chair. "Say rather, Charles, that they went too well. Every man jack of that crew has a motive to murder every other man. It is hard to say which of them hates the most vehemently, and to a man they all hate Dunstable, who seems to have done them each a vile injury." He wrinkled his nose as if he were smelling a bad odour. "If what they tell me reflects the reality of London life these days, I am heartily glad to be elsewhere. It's a wonder that the dock isn't overflowing with murderers and the morgue overflowing with victims." Charles sighed. "They are, but before you begin, I had best tell you what I've learned about the cause of the accident." It took only a minute or two to describe what had been done to the brake, to show Lakin the pot of grease that had been used, and to mention the fingerprint. "Such luck," Lakin said with a touch of humorous sarcasm. "Dactyloscopy to the rescue, eh?" Charles sighed. Unfortunately, the Home Office held the same skeptical attitude toward the use of fingerprints. In fact, the Troop Committee, which had been charged in '93 to study the problem of criminal identification, had last year come down against dactyloscopy and in favor of anthropometry, the complicated system of physical measurements of the length and circumference of the head, length of arms, fingers, feet, and so on, that had been developed over the past 2 decades by Alphonse Bertillon in Paris. Bertillonage seemed to have conquered Europe, its practices being introduced in the police system of Portugal, Denmark, and Holland, and most recently in the German Empire. Meanwhile, dactyloscopy, which Charles regarded as a much more reliable tool of identification, was viewed as an interesting but otherwise impractical scientific curiosity. Only Francis Galton, the old friend of his father who had brought fingerprinting to Charles's attention in 1888, was continuing to collect fingerprints. He asked all visitors to his laboratory in the South Kensington Museum to leave their fingerprints and had a photographic enlargement made of the most interesting, studying the patterns of lines and walls until he had finally created a system for classifying the similarities and differences. But even though Galton's system of identification was, to Charles's mind at least, far more manageable than Bertillon's, it had not found nearly such wide acceptance yet. "I doubt if dactyloscopy can come to the rescue in this instance," Charles said with some regret. "The print is smudged and incomplete and may prove only partially useful. And of course, we should have to match it against a known print. That is why it's important to narrow down the field of suspects." He paused. "And what of your morning's work, Ned? What were you able to learn?" Lakin took out a small notebook and began to flip through the pages. "I might as well begin with Rolls, although I saw him last. He seems to me to have the least motive to harm Dunstable or Albrecht or destroy Marston's motor car, and in fact to have substantial stake in Albrecht winning the chase. He is also the most congenial of the lot, although I found him, if you don't mind my stating an opinion, to be a rather wild young man. He has a taste for loose women. At least, if Frank Ponsonby is to be believed, Ponsonby appears to know all about him. Ah, Charles said gravely, thinking of Patsy Marsden. But it is likely not true, Lakin said. If roles were given to the wrong sort of woman, Bradford would surely not have brought him to Marsden Manor, or if he had, he would have forbidden his sister to have any relationship with the man. Don't be too sure about that, Charles said, remembering Patsy's obvious infatuation and making a mental note to ask Kate's opinion as to what to do with Ponson's tittle-tattle. What about Ponsonby, then? An insolent bastard, Lakin spoke with an unaccustomed feeling. You know, don't you, that he's a bill broker in addition to importing the bents? Charles nodded shortly, and Lakin went on. The man also deals in rumour and hearsay and takes great delight in passing along whatever ugly bits of information he may possess. I am sure that he doesn't scruple to use it, too, to obtain what he wants from his victims. Blackmail? Charles asked. Blackmail, Lakin agreed, especially where encumbrances and liens are concerned. That, at least, is the accusation of Arnold Bateman, who also told me that Ponsonby and Dunstable were caught up in a sordid bit of business with a married cousin of Ponsonby's, a certain Aurora Wickers, who killed herself after Dunstable dropped her. Unfortunately, she committed the fatal act in Ponsonby's own bathtub, thereby leading to certain rumours that... He shook his head. It is too wretched to repeat, but the story certainly suggests that Ponsonby hates Dunstable with a great passion. I don't believe he would hesitate to disgrace him, or to do him in. By sabotaging the motor car which he should have ridden, Charles mused, which might do for either contingency. Exactly so, Lakin looked down at his notebook. And then there is Dixon. Ah, yes, Arthur Dixon, Charles said. Poor Dixon, who had made his fortune and his reputation in steam locomotives, and was a devout steam man as there ever was in all of England. If Dixon had his way, they would all be driving steam cars within another decade. Perhaps not a bad outcome, all things considered. In Charles's view, steam was the most eminently practical motive power. It was proven technology, and therefore it did not face the uncertainties and complication as the yet poorly tested internal combustion engine. As I understand it from Rolls, Lakin said, Dixon is in serious trouble. He has been accused by a competitor of having stolen a patent and must now defend himself. Not an easy task, I'm given to understand, since he has recently suffered a substantial reversal of fortune, for which, he added, the man blames Dunstable. Dunstable, Charles said in some surprise. I am still looking into that one, Lakin replied. Bateman claims, however, that Dixon's feelings toward Dunstable are quite bitter. And what of Bateman himself? Not much there, I'm afraid. He appears to have no special grudge against Dunstable or Albrecht. He and Dixon tangled in some sort of fracas at the Crystal Palace exhibition, but I know about that one, Charles said. A minor accident. I hardly think it's relevant here. I did hear something once about Bateman and Dunstable and the Peters Pneumatic Tire Company, however. Marsden might know the details there. Charles looked up as Mutt came into the room, bearing a heavily laden tray. Ah, luncheon. Put it down in front of the window, please, Mutt. To Lakin he added, It appears that Kate has made off with a cook, so I cannot guarantee a fine lunch today. He gestured to the tray on which was arranged sliced cold meat, sardines, bread, lettuce, radishes, sliced tomatoes, pickles, mustard, and horseradish, as well as a cheesecake and several jam puffs. But from the look of it, he added, I believe that it is adequate. Adequate indeed, Lakin said, rising to join his friend at the table where Mutt had deposited the tray. He took a plate and began to help himself to the sliced cold meat. Of course, the very absence of motive intrigues me where Bateman is concerned. Ah, yes, Charles said, making up his own plate. The others appear to have too much motive, so Bateman is distinguished by having too little. He reached for the carafe. Wine? Or here is beer, if you like. Beer would suit me just fine, Lakin replied, as they sat down with the lunches in their laps. After a moment, Charles said with his mouth full, Of course, there is Dunstable himself. Lakin made a disgusted noise. You know, I hardly know whether to credit that cock and bull story about the man's being beaten and chucked into the dung heap. It's all much too convenient, if you ask me. It takes him out of suspicion. You think he might have made it up, but he was found in the dung heap, was he not? Oh, that's right enough. Discovered on a tarpaulin with his hands tied behind him and wadded up kerchief thrust into his mouth. but the man is a charlatan through and through. I did not myself observe the knots in the rope nor the gag, and it would have been entirely possible for him to have crawled into that dung heap unobserved at any time during the day. And his injuries? I've seen far worse self-inflicted wounds, Lakin chewed reflectively. And of course, there's also the possibility that he hired a couple of village lads to tap him lightly on the head with something that would leave a mark, if he were not confident in managing it himself. But to what end? I've been thinking about that. The man is known to be publicity hound. Perhaps he meant to disable Marston's Daimler, then cry foul, expecting that the newspaperman who was there yesterday would blow the whole thing up, and that he would gain attention and sympathy thereby. Of course, Lakin added, he would not have counted on Albrecht going into a ravine and impaling himself on the tiller. Lakin took up a pickle. There's also the matter of opportunity, Charles said. I suppose you did look into that. For what little good it did me, yes, Lakin said wryly. Assuming that the stuff was smeared on the brake some time after the Daimler was left in the park on Friday night and the start of the chase on Sunday morning, any of the drivers, Dunstable as well, had the opportunity, not to mention the villagers and the workers who were setting up the feet. Or handling the balloon, Charles said. Indeed, Lakin replied. What, by the way, exactly is that substance that was smeared on the brake? I have absolutely no idea, Charles admitted, but I certainly intend to spend some time this afternoon in the laboratory, attempting to analyze it. If I can determine the type of lubricant, perhaps we can trace it to its manufacturer, and hence to one of our suspects. But that is likely to take some time, Lakin objected. Those fellows will not consent to remain for much longer, and it will be difficult to hold them if they should choose to go. He looked up at the clock. It was already nearly 2. I know, Charles said. He put aside his plate. We had better get busy. While I am working in the laboratory, perhaps you can return to the inn and obtain the men's fingerprints. Their fingerprints, Lakin frowned. On what grounds? On suspicion of... I'm afraid that won't do, Charles, Lakin said, shaking his head. It won't do at all. These men may not be gentlemen in society's definition of the word, but they have a high standing in London commerce and are sure to have powerful friends. Anyway, this fingerprinting is a nasty business. You can hardly expect such men to willingly smear their hands and with tar and press them upon printer's ink, Charles amended. It is readily removed. That may be, but this is England. A man is innocent until the jury of his peers pronounces him guilty. Charles stared at his stubborn friend, the frustration mounting inside him. But how are we to discover the guilty man without this evidence net? And don't forget that Scotland Yard is taking fingerprints of convicted felons who have already forfeited their freedom, not of free men who have yet to be charged with the crime. But what then do you do with the fingerprints that are left at the scene of a crime? Charles asked. Is it an invasion of a man's privacy to take those prints for possible use against him? Lakin frowned. At the scene of a crime, I think we may suppose that those prints are those of a criminal, and if you concede as much, then you must also concede that prints that are left anywhere may be taken for possible use in solution of a crime. Am I correct? Anywhere? Lakin looked doubtful. Well, I suppose. Very well then, Charles said. I propose that you go to the inn and see if you can find some objects that have been handled by suspects, so that we may take those fingerprints. You yourself said, don't forget, that any of those may have committed this crime. And don't you forget, Charles, while you and some of your scientific friends may hold dactyloscopy in high regard, no court has ever used such evidence to convict a man. That is only a matter of time, Charles objected, when the method of classification is perfected. Perhaps, but even then there will be difficulties. While judges may be prepared to deal handily with such technical information, juries will scarcely know what to do with it. And privacy is one of the most sacred of our rights. To compel a man's own hands to bear witness against him, Lakin shook his head, intently serious. Where will it ever end, Charles? The next we know, a man may be condemned by the voice of his own blood. Charles shook his head. If you refuse to obtain the suspect's fingerprints so I can compare them to one on the fender, I fail to see how we can... He stopped as the door was opened. Kate came in, looking extraordinarily pretty in brown wool suit and close-fitting wool hat askew on her wind-blown hair. She was followed by a small, round, nervous-looking woman, wrapped head to toe in an old blue shawl. "Hello, Charles," Kate said brightly, and seeing Lakin, added, "You too, Ned." "We've eaten lunch without you, I'm afraid," Lakin said apologetically. "Oh, good," Kate said, taking off her leather driving gloves. She smiled. "I've been to the village where I found someone who may be able to clear up part of our mystery." She took the reluctant woman's hand and led her forward. "Gentlemen, this is Mistress Girton, who has always had a great desire to fly."